My wife drained our entire emergency fund for her brother's life-threatening debt, and he immediately flew to Vegas for a poker tournament. I made them pay it back big time. My wife Lisa and I had been saving for 3 years to build up our emergency fund. We both worked extra shifts, skipped vacations, drove old cars, all so we could have $15,000 saved for real emergencies. Lisa was on board the whole time talking about how we needed security and couldn't rely on anyone else. Her brother Jake was the opposite. 35 years old, quit every job after 2 months, always had some business idea that needed investors. Their parents funded his lifestyle until they retired to Arizona and cut him off. That's when Jake started coming around more often. First it was dinner once a week where he'd eat our food and complain about how unfair life was. Then he was borrowing Lisa's car because his got repossessed. Then he needed groceries because his girlfriend kicked him out. Lisa always said no to money, though. She'd tell me she knew better than to give Jake cash. One Tuesday, I came home from work, and Lisa was sitting at the kitchen table crying. She said Jake had called with a real emergency this time. He owed someone bad money, and they were going to hurt him if he didn't pay by Friday. It was $12,000. I said absolutely not, that wasn't our problem. Lisa said she already gave it to him. She'd withdrawn almost our entire emergency fund that morning. I asked her how she could do that without talking to me. She said Jake promised to pay it back in a month when his new business deal came through. Some garbage about importing furniture or something. I was beyond furious, but Lisa kept saying he was her brother, and she couldn't let him get hurt. 3 days later, Jake posted pictures from Vegas with his girlfriend. The emergency was a lie. He wanted the money for a poker tournament. He didn't even win. When I confronted Lisa, she said Jake told her he used the winnings from the tournament to pay off the debt. There were no winnings. There was no debt. Just Jake being Jake. I told Lisa she needed to get our money back. She called Jake and he laughed, saying it was a gift and we could afford it. Lisa actually defended him, saying we did have good jobs. That's when I knew I was done with both of them. I moved my paychecks to a separate account Lisa couldn't access. She was furious, but I said I couldn't trust her with money anymore. Jake started calling, asking for more help because he knew Lisa had given him money before. Lisa had to tell him she couldn't because I controlled the finances now. Jake called me controlling and abusive. 2 months later, Jake announced he was getting married to some woman named Becca he'd known for 6 weeks. Becca's family had money, and Jake was rushing the wedding before they figured out what he was. He planned this huge wedding at a country club that Becca's parents were paying for. Lisa was so excited and kept talking about her brother finally growing up. She bought a $1,000 bridesmaid dress with her credit card since I wouldn't give her money from my account. The week before the wedding, I did some research on Jake's business ventures. Turns out he'd been taking money from multiple people for the same fake import business. He'd promised 7 different investors they were his sole partner. One of them was Becca's dad. I printed everything out and mailed it anonymously to all the investors. They started comparing notes and realized Jake had taken over $80,000 total for a business that didn't exist. They went to the police together and filed charges for fraud. The police showed up at Jake's bachelor party and arrested him. The wedding was obviously canceled. Becca's family was humiliated and cut all contact. Jake was released on bail that Lisa paid for using her jewelry as collateral. But here's the best part. Jake's lawyer fees were insane, and he needed $20,000 for a decent attorney. He came to our house begging. Lisa looked at me with these pleading eyes. I said I had the money in my separate account that could help. Jake got excited. Then I said, but I wouldn't give him a penny, and neither would Lisa since she had no money left. I told him maybe he should have saved an emergency fund instead of stealing ours. He called me heartless. I called the police and told them he was violating his bail conditions by harassing victims, since technically we were victims too. They picked him up again. Lisa's parents found out about everything at the canceled wedding. They were furious at both their kids. Turns out Jake had taken money from them too over the years. They wrote both Jake and Lisa out of their will until they got their acts together. 6 months later, Lisa served me with divorce papers, claiming financial abuse and demanding half of everything in my separate account plus alimony. I stare at the divorce papers in my hands, and Lisa's attorney has laid out a detailed case claiming I financially abused her by cutting off her access to money after Jake's betrayal. The papers demand half of everything in my separate account, plus 3 years of alimony, because she claims I made her financially dependent. My hands shake with anger because she's rewriting history to make me the villain when I was protecting us from her brother's theft. Every paragraph twists what happened into something ugly and controlling. She says I punished her for being a caring sister. She says I forced her into poverty while I lived comfortably. She says I used money as a weapon to hurt her. I read through the whole thing twice sitting at my kitchen table, and each word makes me angrier. The attorney's name is Gabriella Talley, and she's painted me as some kind of monster who enjoyed watching my wife suffer. There's no mention of Jake lying about the debt. There's no mention of him posting pictures from Vegas while we thought he was in danger. There's no mention of Lisa defending him even after I showed her proof he'd used our money for gambling. Just page after page of how I'm a controlling abuser who cut off his wife's access to basic necessities. I grab my phone and search for divorce attorneys in my area. My coworker Mark went through a divorce 2 years ago, so I text him asking for his lawyer's name. He responds within 5 minutes with a number for Cliff Sanderson and tells me to mention his name. I call immediately and get an appointment for the next morning. I barely sleep that night reading through the papers again and making notes about everything Lisa's attorney got wrong. Cliff Sanderson's office is in a building downtown that smells like old carpet and coffee. I arrive 15 minutes early and fill out intake forms that ask about every detail of my marriage and finances. When Cliff calls me back, he's younger than I expected, maybe 40, with glasses and a tired expression. I hand him the divorce papers and watch his face as he reads through them. He doesn't say anything for several minutes, just flips through pages and occasionally makes notes on a yellow pad. When he looks up, his expression is grim. He explains that while my reasons for creating the separate account were understandable, the way I completely cut Lisa off from household finances could be viewed as financial control. I start to argue that she proved she couldn't be trusted with money, but Cliff holds up his hand. He warns me that courts don't always see protective measures and punitive ones as different things. He asks if Lisa had any access to money for groceries, gas, or personal needs during the 6 months before she filed. I admit she didn't, that I paid all the bills directly but didn't give her cash or access to accounts. Cliff writes something down and tells me that's going to be a problem. He asks if I considered giving her an allowance or opening a joint account with limits. I tell him no, that I was too angry and didn't want her to have any chance to give Jake more money. Cliff nods and says he understands my thinking, but the judge might see it differently. He explains that even though Lisa made a terrible decision, my response of complete financial cutoff for months could look like punishment rather than protection. I feel my stomach drop because I thought I had the moral high ground here. Cliff starts making a list of what we'll need for discovery and tells me this is going to cost around $10,000 if we settle, more if we go to trial. 2 weeks after being served, I sit across from Gabriella Talley, Lisa's attorney, during our first formal meeting, and she presents bank statements showing Lisa had zero access to money for basic needs for 6 months. Cliff is sitting next to me in the conference room of Gabriella's office, which is much nicer than his. Gabriella is probably 50, with perfect makeup and an expensive suit. She spreads out papers on the table showing every transaction from my separate account. She argues I used financial control to punish Lisa for helping her brother, forcing her to max out credit cards for necessities while I had full income access. The bank statements show Lisa charged groceries, gas, and basic supplies to 3 different credit cards that are now maxed out with over $12,000 in debt. Gabriella points to specific charges for things like toilet paper and laundry detergent, asking if I really thought my wife didn't deserve access to household basics. I want to argue that Lisa could have gotten a job, or that this was consequences for her actions, but Cliff squeezes my arm in warning to stay quiet. Gabriella continues laying out her case, showing that I made over $70,000 during those 6 months while Lisa had nothing. She has credit card statements showing late fees and interest charges piling up because Lisa couldn't make minimum payments. She asks if I paid any of those credit card bills. I stay quiet because Cliff told me to, but we both know I didn't. Gabriella smiles slightly and says she thinks a judge will find my behavior constituted financial abuse regardless of my motivations. She offers a settlement of half my separate account, 3 years alimony at $1,500 per month, and I pay all of Lisa's credit card debt. Cliff says we'll consider it and gets us out of there. In the parking lot, he tells me that offer is actually not terrible given how bad the optics are from my side. Jake's criminal fraud case moves forward, and I receive a subpoena to testify as a witness about the $12,000 and his fake business claims. The subpoena arrives at my house 3 weeks into the divorce proceedings, delivered by a process server who makes me sign for it. I feel a surge of satisfaction knowing I'll get to tell the court exactly what Jake did, but when I call Cliff to tell him, his reaction isn't what I expect. He warns me that anything I say under oath in Jake's case could be used against me in the divorce. He explains that if I testify about creating the separate account and cutting Lisa off financially, Gabriella will get a transcript and use my own words to prove her financial abuse case. The legal entanglement means I can't just enjoy watching Jake face consequences without risking my own position. Cliff says we need to be very careful about what I say on the stand, that I should answer only the specific questions asked and not volunteer information about my marriage or financial decisions. I tell him I want Jake to pay for what he did, that this whole mess started with his lies. Cliff understands but reminds me that my priority has to be protecting myself in the divorce, not getting revenge on Jake. We spend an hour going over possible questions the prosecutor might ask and how I should answer them. Cliff makes me practice saying things in ways that don't make me look controlling or vindictive. It's exhausting trying to tell the truth while also managing how it sounds. During the discovery phase of the divorce, Gabriella produces evidence that I was the anonymous source who sent Jake's fraud information to all his investors, including Becca's family. I'm sitting in Cliff's office when he shows me what Gabriella sent over, and my stomach drops. She has my printer metadata from the documents I mailed, and my search history researching Jake's fake business. The metadata shows the documents were printed from my home printer on a specific date, and my search history shows I was looking up information about import fraud and how to report financial crimes. Lisa's attorney argues this proves I deliberately orchestrated Jake's arrest and humiliation as revenge, going beyond protecting our finances into active retaliation against Lisa's family. Gabriella has screenshots of my browser history, showing I searched for Becca's father's business address and looked up other investors in Jake's scheme. She has proof I printed 7 copies of the fraud evidence and mailed them to different addresses. Cliff asks how she got access to my computer, and I realize Lisa must have given her access before we separated. I feel violated and furious that Lisa went through my personal files. Cliff explains that in divorce proceedings, both parties have pretty broad discovery rights. Gabriella's argument is that I wasn't just protecting our money, I was actively trying to destroy Jake and hurt Lisa's family. She's framing me as vindictive and calculated rather than protective. Cliff says this complicates things because it makes me look less like a victim protecting himself and more like someone who enjoys punishing people. He asks if there's any other evidence out there that could make me look bad. I think about everything I've done in the past year and realize there's probably a lot. 3 weeks into the divorce proceedings, Lisa's parents contact me directly, and her father says they want to talk without lawyers present about what really happened. I'm surprised to see their number on my phone because they haven't called since Jake's arrest. Lisa's dad says they're in town and asks if I can meet them for coffee. I check with Cliff first, and he says it's fine as long as I don't agree to anything or make promises. We meet at a coffee shop near their hotel, and they look older than I remember from the canceled wedding. They explain they're furious at both their children, but recognize I was trying to protect myself from Jake's manipulation. Lisa's mom says they know Jake has been lying and stealing for years, that they should have cut him off completely instead of just reducing his support. Her dad says they've been talking to their own attorney about their will and their relationship with both kids. They offer to testify about Jake's history of theft from them, which could help my case, but I feel uncomfortable using their family dysfunction as ammunition, even though they're offering it freely. Lisa's dad mentions that Jake stole over $30,000 from them over the years through various lies and schemes. Her mom says Lisa knew about some of it and never said anything, that she's been covering for Jake since they were kids. They think if a judge hears about the family pattern, it might explain why I reacted so strongly to Lisa giving Jake money. I tell them I appreciate the offer, but Lisa's dad says they understand, but they want me to know they don't think I'm the villain here. They say Lisa made her choice when she gave Jake that money without telling me, and they don't blame me for protecting myself. We talk for over an hour, and they share stories about Jake that make me realize Lisa grew up in a seriously messed up family dynamic. My boss calls me into his office 5 weeks into the proceedings because my work performance has noticeably declined, and I've missed 2 important deadlines while dealing with legal meetings and stress. I've been at this company for 8 years and never had performance issues before. My boss is sympathetic about the divorce, but makes clear that I need to either take formal leave or get my focus back because the team is covering for me. He shows me a list of tasks I've dropped or completed late, and I'm embarrassed seeing it all written out. He mentions that I've been distracted in meetings and short with coworkers. He says he values me as an employee, but the department can't function if I'm not reliable. I apologize and tell him I'll do better, but he says that's not enough. He wants me to either take a month of unpaid leave to deal with my personal issues, or he needs to see immediate improvement with weekly check-ins. I can't afford unpaid leave with all the legal fees, so I commit to the improvement plan. He sets up weekly meetings to review my work and make sure I'm meeting deadlines. I realize the legal battle is bleeding into every part of my life, and I'm losing control of more than just my marriage. That afternoon, I sit at my desk staring at my computer and trying to focus on a project that's due in 3 days. Every time I start working, my mind drifts to the divorce or Jake's criminal case or money problems. I stay late trying to catch up, but I'm so exhausted I can barely think straight. Jake's attorney approaches Cliff about a plea deal, and the prosecutor wants my testimony to strengthen their case, but agreeing to testify means more time in court and more exposure of my role in reporting Jake. Cliff calls me one evening to explain that the district attorney handling Jake's fraud case reached out through Jake's defense lawyer. They're offering Jake a deal where he pleads guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution to all victims. The prosecutor wants me to testify at the plea hearing about the $12,000 and how Jake's lies affected me. I'm torn between wanting to see Jake punished and wanting to minimize my own involvement in the ongoing legal circus. Cliff advises that being a cooperative witness in Jake's case might actually help my image in the divorce by showing I was acting on principle, not just revenge. He explains that if I testify about how Jake's fraud hurt me financially and emotionally, it could support my argument that protecting our finances was reasonable. But it also means another court appearance and more time away from work when I'm already on thin ice with my boss. I ask Cliff what happens if I refuse to testify. He says the prosecutor could compel me with the subpoena, so I don't really have a choice. We schedule the testimony for 2 weeks out, which gives me time to prepare. Cliff and I spend hours going over what I'll say and how to frame everything in a way that helps both cases. I practice my testimony until I can recite it without thinking. The court orders mediation before trial, and Lisa and I sit in a conference room with a mediator who tries to get us to find common ground, but we can't even agree on basic facts about what happened. The mediator is a woman in her 60s who specializes in divorce cases. She starts by explaining that mediation is our chance to avoid an expensive trial and reach an agreement we can both live with. She asks us each to explain our perspective on what led to the divorce. Lisa goes first and tells the story about how I became controlling and cruel after her brother needed help. She says I punished her for being a good sister and made her life miserable for months. When it's my turn, I explain about Jake's lies, the Vegas pictures, and Lisa choosing to defend her con artist brother over our marriage. The mediator tries to find points of agreement, but everything becomes an argument. Lisa insists I turned into a controlling monster after Jake took the money, and I insist she chose her con artist brother over our marriage. We go back and forth for 2 hours, getting nowhere. The mediator keeps trying different approaches, asking about our good memories together, or what we each need to move forward. Nothing works because we're both too angry and hurt. Lisa starts crying at one point, saying she just wanted to help her family and I made her feel worthless. I stay quiet because anything I say will just make it worse. The mediator finally admits we're too far apart for mediation to work, and we're headed for a full divorce trial that will cost us both a fortune. She says she's sorry she couldn't help us reach an agreement. Lisa leaves first, and I sit in the conference room for a few minutes, feeling completely drained. Cliff meets me in the parking lot and says we need to prepare for trial, which means more depositions, more discovery, and a lot more legal fees. Gabriella hires Jean Beckham, a forensic accountant, to examine all our finances, and suddenly every transaction I've made in 3 years is being scrutinized and questioned. Jean's preliminary report arrives at Cliff's office in a thick binder, and we spend an afternoon going through it together. Jean wants to know why I bought a new laptop, why I spent money on dinners out, why I made certain investments, and I feel violated having a stranger judge every financial decision I made. The report shows Jean traced every dollar in and out of our joint account, my separate account, and both our credit cards for the past 3 years. He's highlighted purchases he considers discretionary spending during the time Lisa had no access to money. There's a $1,500 laptop I bought for work. There's $800 in the restaurant charges over 6 months. There's a gym membership I maintained while Lisa couldn't afford basic necessities. Cliff explains this is standard in contested divorces, but it feels like punishment for trying to protect what we'd saved together. Jean's report calculates exactly how much discretionary income I had versus Lisa during the separation period, and the numbers look bad for me. I spent over $12,000 on things beyond basic bills, while Lisa was maxing out credit cards for groceries and gas. Cliff says we need to prepare explanations for each major purchase, showing they were reasonable or necessary, rather than luxuries I enjoyed while punishing Lisa. We start making a list and trying to justify every expense, but even to me, some of them look petty and vindictive now that they're laid out in black and white. 3 weeks after our session with Jean's report, Cliff calls me into his office and slides the final version across his desk. I flip through the pages, and Jean concluded that my separate account had legitimate basis because I kept paying all the household bills, the mortgage, utilities, everything Lisa needed for basic living. He documented that Lisa broke our joint financial agreement by withdrawing $12,000 without discussion or consent. But then I get to page 8 and my stomach drops. Jean calculated that I had complete discretionary income for 6 months, while Lisa had zero access to money beyond what I grudgingly approved for necessities. He listed every restaurant meal I ate alone, every purchase I made, every dollar I spent freely while Lisa maxed out credit cards for groceries. The report calls it an imbalanced power dynamic that went beyond protecting assets into controlling behavior. Cliff watches my face as I read and says, this is actually better than he expected, because Jean didn't call it outright abuse, just problematic control. I ask if this means I win, and Cliff shakes his head saying nobody wins in divorce court, we just try to lose less. He explains that Gabriella will use the power dynamic language to argue for higher alimony, but we can counter with Lisa's initial betrayal and the fact I maintained all household expenses. It's not the complete victory I wanted, but it's also not the disaster Gabriella was probably hoping for when she hired a forensic accountant to examine everything. 2 months later, I'm sitting in a different courtroom watching Jake stand before a judge for his fraud sentencing. The prosecutor reads out how Jake took over $80,000 from 7 different investors for a fake furniture import business that never existed. Jake's attorney Otto Schultz argues that his client is deeply remorseful, has no prior criminal record, and is willing to cooperate fully with restitution payments. The judge looks through the case file for what feels like forever before announcing the sentence. 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, full restitution to all victims on a payment schedule. I wait for the judge to add jail time, but she says since this is Jake's first offense and he's showing cooperation, she's willing to give him a chance to make things right without incarceration. Jake actually smiles when he hears no jail time. I watch him walk out of the courtroom with just probation, and I feel completely cheated. This man destroyed people's trust, stole their money, lied to everyone including his own sister, and he gets to walk free because it's his first time getting caught. At least he has a criminal record now. At least he has to pay everyone back. But it doesn't feel like enough justice for all the damage he caused. Lisa's parents are in the courtroom too, and her father looks just as disappointed as I feel when Jake walks past us grinning like he just won something. 14 days after Jake's sentencing, I'm at work when Cliff calls saying we have a new problem. Becca's family filed a civil lawsuit against Jake for fraud and emotional distress, and their attorney April Walden wants to depose me about what I knew and when I knew it. I ask Cliff how I'm possibly relevant to Becca's lawsuit, and he explains that since I was the one who exposed Jake's fraud scheme, they want my testimony about how I discovered the fake business and why I reported it. I feel exhausted just thinking about another legal proceeding. Every time I think I'm done dealing with Jake's mess, another lawsuit or hearing gets added to my calendar. Cliff says the deposition will probably take half a day, and I need to be careful about what I say because anything I admit could still be used in my own divorce case. I'm being pulled back into Jake's disaster over and over, and I can't escape the consequences of Lisa's decision to help her brother, even though we're separated and heading for divorce. April Walden emails Cliff a list of questions she plans to ask, and I spend my lunch break reading through them. She wants to know when I first suspected Jake was lying. She wants to know why I investigated his business claims. She wants to know if I intended to stop his wedding or just expose his fraud. Every question feels like it's designed to make me look vindictive rather than protective. 3 weeks later, during a routine discovery exchange for the divorce, Gabriella sends over a box of documents that includes something I wasn't expecting. Mixed in with bank statements and credit card bills, there are therapy intake forms showing Lisa started seeing a counselor named Dr. Kendall Smith 4 months into our separation. I flip through the intake notes, and they indicate Lisa is working on understanding why she enabled Jake and how her family dynamics affected her marriage. There are session summaries where Lisa discusses her pattern of protecting her brother at the expense of other relationships. She's actually examining her role in what happened. I feel an unexpected flash of something that might be empathy, reading that Lisa recognizes she made terrible choices and is trying to understand why. For about 30 seconds, I think maybe we could have worked this out if she'd gotten therapy earlier. Then I remember she's currently suing me for financial abuse and demanding half of everything plus alimony, and the empathy hardens back into defensive resentment. She can examine her role all she wants in therapy, but she's still trying to take my money in court. She's still claiming I'm the abuser when she's the one who betrayed our trust first. I shove the therapy forms back in the box and tell Cliff I don't care that Lisa's seeing a counselor. It doesn't change what she did or what I'm willing to settle for. 6 months into the divorce proceedings, Cliff asks me to come to his office for a serious conversation without any legal documents between us. He sits across from me and explains that going to trial is extremely risky because judges are unpredictable, and I could end up paying more in alimony and asset division than if we settle now. He pulls out a spreadsheet showing the legal fees I've accumulated so far, and the number makes me feel sick. $18,000 in attorney fees, expert witness fees, court costs, and filing expenses. Then he shows me a projection of what a trial would cost with more depositions, expert testimony, and 3 days of courtroom time. Another $15,000 to $20,000 minimum. I'm looking at potentially spending more on legal fees than Jake originally stole from our emergency fund. Cliff says my pride wants to fight this in court and be vindicated, but my practical side needs to recognize that neither Lisa nor I can afford to keep bleeding money to attorneys. He explains that settlement means compromise, and I won't get everything I want, but I also won't risk a judge deciding I'm completely in the wrong and awarding Lisa even more than she's asking for. I sit in his office for 20 minutes doing math in my head, and every calculation leads to the same conclusion. Fighting this in court is going to cost me more than settling, even if settlement feels like admitting I did something wrong. Settlement negotiations begin the following week, and every discussion feels like pulling teeth as we argue over furniture, retirement accounts, debt responsibility, and how much alimony is fair. Gabriella opens by demanding 4 years of alimony at $2,000 per month, which would be $96,000 total. Cliff counters with 1 year at $800 per month, which is less than $10,000. We're so far apart that the first mediation session ends with nothing resolved. The second session focuses on dividing assets, and we spend 3 hours arguing about who gets the couch, the television, the kitchen table we bought together. Lisa wants half of my retirement account, even though most of it was there before we married. I want her to take responsibility for the credit card debt she accumulated during our separation. Gabriella argues that I forced Lisa into debt by cutting off her access to money. Cliff argues that Lisa created the situation by giving Jake our emergency fund. We haggle over the price of ending our marriage like we're negotiating a car purchase, and it feels degrading and exhausting in ways I never imagined when I first got those divorce papers. By the third mediation session, we've moved slightly closer. Gabriella drops to 3 years of alimony at $1,500 per month. Cliff counters with 18 months at $1,000 per month. We're still haggling, still arguing, still spending money on attorneys to fight over money. 8 months into the proceedings, I open my mailbox and find a check from the county clerk's office for $8,000. It's Jake's first restitution payment, partial repayment of what he took from our emergency fund. The payment schedule shows more checks coming over the next 2 years until the full $12,000 is repaid. I should feel victorious holding this check. I got the money back. Jake is being forced to make things right. But instead, I feel hollow because I've already spent more than $8,000 on legal fees fighting Lisa. I got the money back from Jake, but lost so much more in the process of pursuing justice. I deposit the check and watch my account balance tick up, and it doesn't bring any satisfaction. The money is just money now, not the symbol of security and partnership it used to be. I earned this victory by destroying my marriage and spending a fortune on lawyers, and I'm not sure the math works out in my favor anymore. 7 months into the proceedings, Lisa's parents call me and ask if I'd be willing to meet with them and Lisa outside the legal process. Her father says they think Lisa and I need to actually talk to each other as humans rather than through attorneys who benefit from our conflict. I'm skeptical because every conversation with Lisa for the past year has ended in arguments, but I agree to meet at their house with them present as neutral parties. I drive to their place on a Saturday afternoon, and when I walk in, Lisa is already sitting on the couch looking nervous. She looks exhausted and older than I remember, with dark circles under her eyes and lines around her mouth that weren't there before. I wonder if I look the same to her, worn down by months of legal battles and stress. Her parents sit in chairs flanking the couch, and her father starts by saying they love both of us and hate watching us destroy each other through lawyers. Her mother says they think we both need to be honest about what really happened without attorneys spinning everything. Lisa looks at me and I look at her, and neither of us knows how to start a real conversation after months of communicating only through legal documents. Lisa speaks first, and her voice breaks almost immediately. She says Jake called her that day claiming he was going to hurt himself if she didn't help, and she was so conditioned to protect him that she couldn't see how he was using her. She admits she's been enabling Jake since they were kids, always covering for him, always believing his stories, always putting his needs above everyone else's, including mine. She acknowledges that taking the money without telling me destroyed my trust, and that she chose family loyalty over our partnership when it mattered most. She's crying now, really crying. Not the angry tears from our fights, but genuine remorse. She says she knows she broke something fundamental between us, and that she understands why I couldn't trust her anymore. I listen to her genuine remorse and realize that while she made terrible choices, Jake was the real architect of this disaster. Lisa was caught between impossible loyalties, programmed from childhood to protect her brother no matter what, and Jake exploited that conditioning ruthlessly. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it helps me understand why she did it. Her parents are quiet, letting us talk without interruption. For the first time in a year, I admit out loud that cutting Lisa off financially completely was about punishing her as much as protecting our money. I acknowledge that I used financial control as a weapon because I felt so powerless after her betrayal. I tell her that making her beg for grocery money or forcing her to max out credit cards crossed a line from protection into retaliation. I wanted her to suffer the way I was suffering, and I used money as the tool to make that happen. I say I was so focused on being right and making sure she faced consequences that I became the controlling person Jake accused me of being. We're both crying by the end of the conversation, not because we want to reconcile or because we think we can fix our marriage, but because we're finally being honest about how badly we both handled an impossible situation. Her parents hand us tissues and we sit in their living room, acknowledging our failures without lawyers telling us what to say or how to spin it. Lisa reaches across the space between us and squeezes my hand once, and I squeeze back, and we both let go. The next mediation session happens 3 days after our conversation at her parents' house. We sit in the same conference room with Cliff and Gabriella, but something feels different this time. The hostile energy that filled previous meetings has shifted into something more tired and resigned. Gabriella opens with their latest offer, and I notice Lisa watching me instead of staring at the table like she did before. The numbers are closer to reasonable than anything we've discussed. Half of the assets split fairly evenly, 2 years of modest alimony that I can actually afford, and we each keep our own retirement accounts. Cliff looks at me and raises his eyebrows like he's asking if I want to keep fighting, or if I'm ready to accept reality. I think about the legal fees piling up and the energy I've spent being angry for months. I nod and tell him it works for me. Lisa looks relieved and says quietly that she agrees too. Gabriella seems almost disappointed that we're settling, because I think she wanted to take this to trial and make more billable hours. Cliff starts drafting the settlement agreement right there, while we sit in awkward silence. Lisa's hands are folded on the table, and I notice she's not wearing her wedding ring anymore. Neither am I. We both took them off somewhere along the way without discussing it. The mediator comes back to finalize some details and congratulates us on reaching an agreement like we accomplished something instead of just admitting defeat. We sign the papers an hour later and shake hands across the table. Lisa's hand feels small and cold in mine. Cliff tells me it's a fair outcome given everything, and that I should feel good about protecting myself while not destroying her completely. I walk to my car feeling relief that the fighting is over, but also this heavy grief for everything we built together that's now just numbers on legal documents. 2 weeks pass, and I'm sorting through mail at my apartment when Lisa's mother calls. Her voice sounds strained, and she asks if I've heard about Jake. I say no and brace myself for whatever mess he's created now. She explains that Jake contacted one of his other victims, some guy named Alexander who invested $20,000 in the fake furniture business. Jake called Alexander and tried to convince him to drop the restitution claim by promising he'd pay him back directly with interest if Alexander would just tell the court he didn't want the money anymore. Alexander recorded the call and sent it to Jake's probation officer. The judge held a hearing yesterday and revoked Jake's probation entirely. He sentenced Jake to 90 days in county jail, plus 3 more years of probation after he gets out. Lisa's mother sounds exhausted telling me this, and says she's done trying to help Jake because he never learns. I thank her for letting me know and hang up feeling this weird, empty satisfaction. Part of me wanted Jake to face real consequences, and now he is, but I don't feel the triumph I expected. Mostly I just feel tired of the whole situation, and ready for Jake to be completely irrelevant to my life. I delete his number from my phone and block him on all social media. I'm done with Jake and everything he represents. 9 months after Lisa served me with divorce papers, we stand in a courtroom for the final hearing. The judge is an older woman with reading glasses who reviews our settlement agreement for maybe 5 minutes before asking if we both understand and agree to the terms. We each say yes from opposite sides of the room. She signs the papers and declares our marriage dissolved effective immediately. The whole thing takes less than 15 minutes. We don't look at each other or speak. Gabriella shakes Lisa's hand, and they leave through one door while Cliff and I leave through another. I walk across the parking lot to my car and sit behind the wheel for a few minutes before starting the engine. I'm legally single again. The marriage is over. I feel grief, but not for what we became at the end, fighting through lawyers and dividing up our lives like a business transaction. I feel sad for the marriage we had before Jake's betrayal destroyed everything. I grieve the couple who saved together and planned a future and trusted each other. That version of us died the day Lisa gave Jake our emergency fund without telling me. What ended today in court was just the legal paperwork catching up to what already happened. I move into a new apartment across town the following week. It's a 1-bedroom place in an older building, nothing fancy but clean and affordable on my post-divorce budget. The rent is $800 a month, which is manageable now that I'm paying alimony and rebuilding my savings. I hire movers to bring my furniture from storage and spend the first night surrounded by boxes stacked against bare walls. The apartment feels empty and quiet after years of sharing space with Lisa. I unpack my bedroom first because I need somewhere to sleep. I set up my bed and realize I'm starting over at 38 years old when I thought I'd be settled with a house and maybe kids by now. The uncertainty of rebuilding my entire life from scratch is terrifying. But there's also something oddly freeing about having complete control over my space and my choices without worrying about someone else's brother manipulating the situation. I make myself dinner using paper plates because I haven't unpacked the kitchen yet. I eat standing at the counter and look around at the boxes that represent my new solo life. It's not what I planned, but it's mine. 2 weeks after the divorce finalizes, I make an appointment with a therapist named Suzanne Tate. My insurance covers 8 sessions, and I figure I should probably talk to someone about everything that happened. Suzanne's office is in a medical building downtown, and she's probably in her 50s with short gray hair and a calm expression. I sit on her couch and immediately start defending myself. I explain how Lisa betrayed me by giving Jake our emergency fund without permission. I detail how I exposed Jake's fraud and protected our finances by creating a separate account. I list all the ways I was justified in my actions and how Lisa brought the divorce on herself. Suzanne listens without interrupting and takes notes occasionally. When I finish my defensive explanation, she asks me a simple question. She wants to know if I came here to be validated or to actually examine what happened. The question catches me off guard, and I feel defensive anger rising. But then I realize I spent the last hour proving I was right, instead of actually looking at my own behavior. I'm still so angry and hurt that I can't see my role clearly and how everything fell apart. I tell Suzanne I'll come back next week and try to actually work on this instead of just defending myself. She nods and says, "That's a good start." My annual work performance review happens 1 month after the divorce. My boss Dan calls me into his office and closes the door. He acknowledges that I've had a difficult year with the divorce and legal issues. He says he understands personal problems happen. But then his tone shifts and he makes clear that my performance has declined noticeably and it needs to improve significantly, or there will be consequences. He shows me metrics from the last 6 months. I missed 2 major deadlines. My project quality dropped. I was late to meetings or didn't show up at all. Other team members had to cover my work while I dealt with lawyers and court dates. Dan hands me a development plan with specific goals and regular check-ins. I have 3 months to show improvement, or I'll be placed on formal probation. I feel embarrassed and angry at myself for letting my personal crisis bleed into my professional reputation. I spent years building credibility at this company and nearly destroyed it in less than a year of divorce chaos. But I also recognize I need the structure and accountability. I thank Dan and promise to do better. I mean it this time. 6 weeks after the divorce, I'm shopping for groceries on a Saturday afternoon when I see Lisa in the produce section. She's examining apples and doesn't notice me at first. I consider leaving before she sees me, but that feels cowardly. I walk over and say hi. She looks up startled and then smiles awkwardly. We have maybe 30 seconds of stilted conversation about how we're both doing. She looks healthier than during the divorce proceedings, less stressed. She mentions she got a job at a medical office doing billing work. The hours are decent and the pay is okay. I tell her I'm glad she's working and I mean it without any sarcasm or resentment. She asks how I'm doing, and I say I'm adjusting to the apartment and focusing on work. We stand there for another moment not knowing what else to say. She tells me to take care of myself and I say the same to her. We part ways and continue our separate shopping. I realize walking away that I don't hate her anymore. The anger that consumed me for months has faded into something quieter. I just feel sad about how everything fell apart and grateful that we can at least be civil when we run into each other. 2 months after the divorce, Lisa's parents call and invite me to a family dinner at their house. I spend 3 days trying to decide if maintaining that connection is healthy or if I need clean boundaries with my ex-wife's family. I talk about it in therapy, and Suzanne asks what I'm afraid of. I realize I'm scared of getting pulled back into their family drama or feeling obligated to care about their problems. But I also recognize they've been kind to me throughout this whole mess, and they're not responsible for what Jake or Lisa did. I call them back and decline the dinner invitation, but tell them I'm open to occasional coffee and updates about how everyone is doing. I need some distance, but I don't want to cut them off completely. Lisa's father sounds relieved when I explain this. He says they understand and respect my boundary. He's glad I'm not shutting them out entirely. I hang up feeling good about the decision. I'm learning to set limits that protect me without burning every bridge. After a year of scorched earth tactics with Lisa and Jake, this feels like actual growth. We agree to meet for coffee every few months to stay loosely connected. It feels like a mature compromise that honors what we meant to each other, without pretending the divorce didn't happen. Our first coffee meeting happens at a place near their house. Lisa's mother brings photos of their trip to Arizona, and we talk about normal things for a while. Then her father mentions Lisa has completely cut off contact with Jake. She told him she won't help him anymore no matter what sob story he invents. She blocked his number and refused to visit him in jail. She told their parents that Jake used her for years, and she's done being his safety net. I feel validation hearing that Lisa finally learned the lesson I tried to teach her. She recognized Jake's manipulation and set boundaries to protect herself. The growth came too late to save our marriage, but at least she got there eventually. I tell her parents I'm proud of Lisa for making that choice, even though it was probably hard. They seem grateful that I can acknowledge Lisa's progress without bitterness. We finish our coffee and agree to meet again in a few months. The connection feels right, not forced or painful. 3 months after the divorce, I meet Lisa's parents for coffee again, and they update me on Jake's situation. He completed his 90-day jail sentence and was released last week with much stricter probation terms. He has to attend mandatory financial counseling twice a month and check in with his probation officer weekly. He's living in a halfway house on the east side of town and working at a fast food restaurant to pay his restitution. They mention he makes minimum wage, and most of it goes directly to the court-ordered payments. Lisa's father says Jake called asking for money to get his own apartment, but they refused. They're done enabling him too. I listen to all this information and wait for the surge of satisfaction I expected to feel hearing about Jake's reduced circumstances. It doesn't come. Instead, I feel a weary indifference because Jake is no longer relevant to my life. He's paying consequences and learning hard lessons, but none of it affects me anymore. I'm building a new life, and Jake is just a bad memory that's fading into the background. I thank them for the update, and we move on to talking about other things. Jake doesn't deserve any more of my emotional energy or attention. 4 months after starting therapy, I sit in Suzanne's office for what turns out to be the session that changes everything. She asks me to talk about my earliest memories of money, and I tell her about being 7 years old when my dad lost his job. I remember my mom crying at the kitchen table with bills spread out everywhere. I remember her telling me we couldn't afford new shoes even though mine had holes in the soles. I remember eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row because that's all we had left. Suzanne listens and then asks me how that made me feel. I say scared and helpless and like the ground could disappear under me at any moment. She nods and asks if I still feel that way sometimes. I realize I do. I realize I felt it every single day we were building that emergency fund with Lisa. I felt it when Jake took the money. I felt it so intensely that I couldn't think straight or see anything except the need to control and protect what was mine. Suzanne helps me understand that Lisa's betrayal didn't create my fear about money. It triggered something that was already there waiting to explode. My childhood taught me that financial security could vanish instantly and leave you drowning. Lisa giving Jake that money wasn't just about $12,000. It was every terrifying moment from my childhood rushing back at once. Understanding this doesn't make what Lisa did okay or excuse my response, but it helps me see why I reacted so hard and went so far. I wasn't just protecting money. I was fighting against being that scared 7-year-old again. I think about the friends I stopped calling during the worst of the divorce. Mark from college, who used to come over for basketball games. Jennifer from work, who always invited me to her cookouts. Andrew and his wife, who we used to have dinner with once a month. I withdrew from all of them because I was too angry and consumed to be around normal people having normal lives. I send Mark a text asking if he wants to grab a beer. He responds within 5 minutes saying yes and suggesting a place near my apartment. We meet up and I apologize for disappearing. He waves it off and says he figured I was going through something rough. I tell him about the divorce and Jake and the whole mess. He listens without judgment and then tells me about his own bad breakup 3 years ago that nearly destroyed him. We talk for 2 hours and make plans to watch the playoffs together next week. I reach out to Jennifer next and she invites me to her next cookout. I go and meet her husband and kids and feel almost normal for the first time in months. Andrew and his wife have me over for dinner and we play board games until midnight. Being around people who knew me before all this happened helps me remember who I used to be. I wasn't always this angry person obsessed with control and revenge. I used to laugh and relax and enjoy things. My friends welcomed me back without making me grovel or explain every detail. They just let me be part of their lives again. We start having regular game nights at Mark's place. Jennifer includes me in her weekend plans. Andrew and I start playing tennis on Saturday mornings. Having these connections back makes me realize how isolated I became while fighting with Lisa. I cut myself off from everyone and turned into someone I barely recognize. 6 months after the divorce finalizes, I make an appointment with a financial planner named Richard, who comes recommended by a coworker. I walk into his office feeling nervous about what he'll tell me. I bring all my bank statements and investment records and the divorce settlement paperwork. Richard spends an hour going through everything while I sit there expecting him to say I'm in terrible shape. Instead, he looks up and says, I'm actually doing okay considering what I went through. The divorce was expensive, but I kept working and maintained my savings habits even during the chaos. My retirement accounts took a hit from the settlement, but they're not destroyed. I have about $6,000 in liquid savings right now. Richard helps me create a plan to rebuild my emergency fund systematically. We set a goal of getting back to $15,000 within 18 months by saving $800 per month. This time, the emergency fund feels different because it's mine alone. I'm not building it as part of a shared future or joint security. I'm doing it for myself and my own peace of mind. Richard also helps me look at my overall financial picture and set realistic goals for retirement and future purchases. He suggests some investment adjustments that will help me recover faster from the divorce costs. By the end of the meeting, I feel cautiously hopeful about my financial stability returning. I'm not where I was before Jake took the money, but I'm not destroyed either. I have a plan and the ability to execute it. Richard schedules a follow-up in 3 months to track my progress. I leave his office feeling lighter than I have in over a year. 7 months after the divorce, my phone buzzes with a text from Lisa. I stare at her name on my screen for a full minute before opening it. She asks if I'd be willing to meet for coffee because she's working through some things in therapy and wants a closure conversation. My first instinct is to say no and block her number. But I'm curious what she wants to say. I'm also far enough past the anger that I think I can handle seeing her without losing my mind. I text back that I'll meet her at a neutral coffee shop downtown. We agree on a time for Saturday afternoon. When Saturday comes, I arrive at the coffee shop early and pick a table in the back corner. Lisa walks in exactly on time looking nervous. She's wearing jeans and a sweater I don't recognize. Her hair is shorter than it was during the divorce. She looks healthier somehow, less stressed. We sit down across from each other and order coffee. The silence is awkward at first. Lisa thanks me for agreeing to meet. She says she knows I didn't have to, and she appreciates that I'm giving her this chance. She tells me she's been in therapy consistently since the divorce, and she's been working hard to understand her part in everything that happened. She says she needs to have this conversation for her own healing process. I nod and tell her I'm listening. She looks determined but also scared, like she's about to jump off a cliff. Lisa starts talking, and I force myself to really listen instead of preparing my defense. She admits she enabled Jake her whole life because she was conditioned to protect him from consequences. Their parents always made her responsible for keeping Jake out of trouble. If he failed, it somehow reflected on her as the older sister. She learned to cover for him and rescue him and prioritize his needs over everything else. When Jake called with the fake emergency about owing money, she didn't even question it. She just went into automatic rescue mode like she'd done 1,000 times before. Lisa says taking the money without telling me was the worst decision she ever made. She chose family loyalty over our partnership when it mattered most. She destroyed my trust and our financial security because she couldn't see past her need to save Jake. She acknowledges that defending Jake afterward and making excuses for him made everything worse. She should have admitted her mistake and worked to fix it instead of doubling down. I listen to all this, and then I tell her my side. I admit that cutting her off financially completely was about punishing her as much as protecting our money. I used financial control as a weapon because I felt so powerless after her betrayal. Making her beg for grocery money and forcing her to max out credit cards crossed a line from protection into revenge. I let my need to be right override any compassion or understanding. I admit that reporting Jake to his investors was partially about justice, but also about hurting Lisa's family because I was so angry at her. We both sit with these admissions for a while. Lisa says she understands why I reacted the way I did, even though it hurt. I say I understand why she helped Jake even though it destroyed us. We agree that we both could have handled things differently. Neither of us was completely right or completely wrong. We were just two people making terrible choices under pressure and then making more terrible choices in response. We release each other from the ongoing hostility that's been poisoning us both. This conversation doesn't fix anything or change the past, but it feels like we're finally being honest without lawyers or anger dominating every word. Lisa tells me something I didn't know. Jake tried to manipulate her into lying to his probation officer about his employment a few months ago. He wanted her to say he was working for her at a fake job, so he could meet his probation requirements without actually working. Lisa refused. Jake got angry and said she owed him after everything he'd been through because of me. He tried to guilt her using all his usual tactics. Lisa told him no and blocked his number. She says therapy helped her see that protecting Jake hurt everyone, including him. By constantly rescuing him from consequences, she prevented him from ever learning or growing. She enabled his worst behaviors and made it possible for him to keep hurting people. She's done being his safety net. She told their parents she won't help Jake anymore no matter what story he tells. She won't give him money or cover for him or lie for him. She's completely cut him out of her life. I feel genuine respect for Lisa making that choice. I know it wasn't easy to walk away from her brother after a lifetime of being his protector. I tell her I think she's doing the right thing for herself. She needs to protect her own peace and stability instead of sacrificing everything for Jake's endless needs. We talk for another hour about our lives now. Lisa tells me about her job at the medical office and how she's slowly rebuilding her finances. I tell her about therapy and reconnecting with friends. We share updates without any agenda or hidden motives. When we're ready to leave, we stand up and Lisa asks if she can hug me. I say yes. We hug briefly, and it feels like we're finally able to let go of the marriage without hating each other. We walk out of the coffee shop going in different directions. I feel lighter somehow. The closure conversation wasn't about reconciliation or friendship. It was about releasing the poison and moving forward separately without dragging all that anger into our new lives. 8 months after the divorce, my boss calls me into his office, and I immediately worry about another performance discussion. Instead, he tells me he's been impressed with my turnaround over the past few months. My work quality is back to where it should be. I'm meeting deadlines consistently. I'm contributing in meetings again. He says he wants to offer me a promotion to senior analyst with a significant raise and new responsibilities managing a small team. I stare at him for a second, processing the news. I ask if he's serious. He smiles and says completely serious. The promotion comes with a $12,000 salary increase and the chance to mentor 3 junior analysts. I accept immediately and thank him for giving me another chance after nearly destroying my professional reputation. He says everyone goes through rough patches and what matters is how you recover. I walk out of his office feeling proud of myself for the first time in forever. I managed to rebuild my career standing after letting it fall apart during the divorce chaos. The increased income will help me recover financially faster than I expected. I can boost my emergency fund contributions and maybe even start saving for a down payment on a house eventually. That night, I call my dad and tell him about the promotion. He congratulates me and says he's proud of how I handled everything. I realize I'm proud of myself too. Not for how I handled the crisis with Lisa and Jake, but for how I picked myself up afterward and did the hard work of actually getting better instead of staying bitter and stuck. 9 months after the divorce, Jennifer mentions she has a friend from her book club who's recently single and might be interested in meeting someone. I panic a little at the thought of dating again. I haven't been on a first date in over a decade. I don't even know how to talk to someone new romantically, but I also feel ready to at least try. I tell Jennifer okay, and she sets up a casual coffee date for the following Saturday. The woman's name is Caroline, and she works as a librarian. We meet at the same coffee shop where I met Lisa for closure. Caroline is waiting at a table with a book in her hands. She's wearing glasses and has curly brown hair. We shake hands awkwardly and order drinks. The first few minutes are rough. I'm rusty at first date conversation. I don't know what to say or ask. Caroline seems nervous too. But then we start talking about the book she brought and discover we both love the same author. We move on to discussing other books and then travel and then our jobs. Before I know it, 2 hours have passed and we're still talking. Caroline tells me about her divorce 3 years ago and how hard it was to start over. I tell her about Lisa and Jake and the whole mess. She listens without judgment. We both acknowledge that we're carrying baggage from our past relationships. When it's time to leave, we exchange numbers and Caroline says she'd like to do this again. I agree. Walking to my car, I feel hopeful that I can be vulnerable with someone new eventually. I'm not ready to rush into anything serious, but having a good first date after everything feels like real progress. Maybe I can build something healthy with someone who doesn't know the angry, bitter version of me from the divorce. 10 months after the divorce, I get a notification on social media that Jake sent me a message. I almost delete it without reading, but curiosity wins. The message is long and starts with Jake saying he's working on making amends as part of his recovery program. He apologizes for taking the money and lying about the emergency. He acknowledges that his actions hurt me and Lisa and destroyed our marriage. He says he's been doing a lot of work on himself, and he understands now that he was manipulative and selfish. He asks for my forgiveness and says he hopes we can move forward without animosity. I read the message once and immediately recognized it as self-serving rather than genuinely apologetic. Jake isn't sorry for what he did. He's sorry he got caught and faced consequences. This message is about checking off a box in his recovery program. It's not about actually making things right or understanding the damage he caused. The old me would have written back a long, angry response listing everything Jake did wrong. But I don't feel the need to engage anymore. I block Jake without responding. I feel firm and clear about that boundary without any anger or need to explain myself. Jake doesn't deserve access to me or my emotional energy. He doesn't deserve a response or forgiveness or anything else from me. That healthy detachment feels like real progress. A year ago, I would have obsessed over that message and spent days crafting the perfect cutting response. Now I just delete it and move on with my day. 1 year after Lisa served me with divorce papers, I spend the evening on my apartment balcony reflecting on everything that's happened. The date hits me hard, even though I knew it was coming. 12 months ago, I was served papers claiming financial abuse and demanding alimony. I was furious and self-righteous and convinced I was completely right about everything. Now I sit here feeling sad, but also grounded in a way I wasn't back then. I think about the emergency fund Lisa and I built together through 3 years of sacrifice. I think about how Jake's lie destroyed that security and triggered all my deepest fears about money. I think about Lisa's choice to help her brother without telling me and how that betrayal shattered my trust. I think about my choice to use financial control as punishment and how that crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. I think about the legal battles that drained us both financially and emotionally. I think about Jake's fraud charges and probation and how he's still out there learning very little from his consequences. I think about the painful growth Lisa and I have both done separately. She learned to stop enabling Jake and set boundaries to protect herself. I learned that my need for control came from childhood trauma and that being right doesn't excuse being cruel. We both made terrible choices under pressure and then had to live with the consequences. I recognize sitting here that there are no clear villains or heroes in what happened. Jake is definitely the worst of us, but Lisa and I both contributed to the disaster. We were flawed people dealing with an impossible situation, and we handled it badly in different ways. The marriage is over. The money got rebuilt. Jake faced some consequences. Lisa and I found closure without hatred. I'm dating someone new and building a healthier life. None of it feels like victory or defeat. It just feels like survival and slow, painful growth. I finish my beer and go inside to bed feeling melancholy, but okay with where I ended up. At the office 2 weeks later, my boss called me into a conference room and closed the door behind us. He slid a folder across the table with the promotion details inside. The new title came with a 20% raise and management responsibilities for 3 team members. I signed the paperwork that afternoon and spent the rest of the week training my replacement on my old duties while learning the new systems I'd be managing. The promotion felt like proof I'd successfully rebuilt what I nearly destroyed during the divorce chaos. Managing people were different from I expected. I had to review their work, give feedback, help them solve problems they couldn't figure out alone. One guy on my team kept making the same mistake with client reports, and I sat with him for an hour walking through the correct process step by step. Another team member asked for advice about work-life balance, and I found myself actually enjoying the mentoring role. Helping other people develop their skills gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The woman from book club texted me asking if I wanted to get dinner at a nice Italian place downtown. We'd had coffee once and talked about books for 2 hours, but this felt more like a real date. I showed up nervous in a button-down shirt I'd ironed twice. She wore a blue dress and smiled when she saw me walk in. We ordered wine and pasta, and the conversation shifted from casual book talk to deeper territory. She asked about my divorce, and I told her the truth about Lisa's betrayal, my financial control, the legal battles that drained us both. I admitted I was still working through trust issues and didn't want to rush into anything serious. She nodded and said she appreciated the honesty instead of getting scared off like I worried she might. She told me about her own failed engagement 3 years ago and how she'd spent time in therapy learning to recognize red flags. We talked about what we wanted going forward and both agreed we were looking for something real and healthy, not just filling loneliness. When the check came, I paid and we walked to our cars in the parking lot. She suggested we do this again and I agreed immediately. We made plans for a third date the following weekend. Driving home, I felt cautiously optimistic that maybe I could build something new with someone eventually. Lisa's parents met me at our regular coffee shop, and we ordered our usual drinks before sitting by the window. Her mom mentioned that Lisa was doing really well at her new billing job and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in over a year. Then her dad said Lisa had started dating someone who treated her with respect and kindness. They shared this as a neutral update without trying to make me jealous or hurt. I surprised myself by feeling genuinely glad that Lisa was moving forward positively instead of stuck in bitterness. I told them I was dating too, and that we were both building new lives separate from each other. There was no longing or regret in the conversation, just acknowledgement that we'd both survived something difficult and came out the other side. Her mom squeezed my hand across the table and said she was proud of both of us for doing the hard work to heal. We finished our coffee and made plans to meet again in a few months. Walking back to my car, I felt peaceful about the whole exchange. I logged into my bank account one evening and scrolled through my savings balance. The number read $15,000 exactly. I'd rebuilt the entire emergency fund through consistent saving from my new salary over the past 15 months. The achievement felt symbolic and satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with Lisa or Jake anymore. This money was mine alone, built for my security, representing my ability to recover and protect myself without needing to control anyone else. I transferred an extra $100 into the account just to push it over the original amount. Then I closed my laptop and went to the kitchen to make dinner. The emergency fund existed again, but it meant something completely different now. It wasn't about us anymore. It was about me taking care of myself and building stability on my own terms. My final therapy session with Suzanne happened on a Thursday afternoon. We'd been working together consistently through the divorce and recovery period, meeting every 2 weeks for over a year. She told me I'd developed the tools I needed for healthier relationships and better emotional regulation. We spent the hour reviewing how far I'd come from the angry defensive person who first walked into her office. I remembered that first session when I'd spent 50 minutes justifying every choice I made and insisting I was completely right about everything. Now I could acknowledge my mistakes and understand the complex dynamics that led to the marriage breakdown. Suzanne said I'd done the hard work of examining myself instead of just blaming others. I felt proud of the progress and grateful I'd sought help instead of staying bitter and stuck. She reminded me that growth wasn't linear and I might still struggle with trust issues or control tendencies occasionally. But now I had strategies to recognize those patterns and make different choices. We shook hands at the end and she told me her door was always open if I needed support in the future. Walking out of her office for the last time felt like closing an important chapter. Caroline and I met for dinner at a Thai restaurant near her apartment. This was our 5th date, and the conversation had gotten progressively deeper each time. After we ordered, she brought up the question of whether we wanted to try being exclusive. I felt nervous about commitment after everything with Lisa, but Caroline had been patient and understanding about my need to move slowly. I told her I wanted to try, but I was scared of repeating old patterns. She reached across the table and held my hand. She said she wasn't Lisa, and I wasn't the same person I was during my marriage. We'd both learned from our past relationships and could build something different together. I agreed we should be exclusive and see where things went. The conversation felt vulnerable but hopeful instead of terrifying. We spent the rest of dinner talking about practical things like how often we'd see each other and meeting each other's friends. Walking her to her car afterward, she kissed me, and I felt genuine excitement about the future for the first time in years. Caroline and I were browsing a farmer's market on a Saturday morning when I spotted Lisa across the produce section with a man I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened instinctively, but then I reminded myself to breathe. Lisa saw me at the same moment, and we both walked toward each other. She introduced her partner, whose name was Alexander, and I introduced Caroline. We made pleasant small talk about the weather and the market vendors and how we were both doing. There was no awkwardness or lingering tension, just two people who used to be married and had moved on to different lives. Alexander seemed nice and genuinely cared about Lisa, based on how he looked at her. Caroline was friendly and warm in a way that made the whole interaction feel natural. We wished each other well and actually meant it. Walking away with Caroline, I felt peaceful about the encounter rather than upset or regretful. She asked if I was okay, and I told her honestly that I was. 2 years after Jake's initial betrayal, I sat on my apartment balcony with a beer watching the sunset. The date hit me hard, even though I hadn't been consciously tracking the anniversary. I thought about the journey from that moment to now and recognized I was genuinely okay, in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever be again. I'd learned painful lessons about trust and control and consequences and the complexity of human relationships where nobody is purely right or wrong. Lisa and I both made mistakes, and Jake faced real consequences, and we all survived and grew in messy, imperfect ways. I was building a relationship with Caroline based on better communication and healthier boundaries than I'd ever managed with Lisa. My career was thriving with the new management position and increased responsibilities. My finances were stable with the rebuilt emergency fund and consistent savings habits. I'd done the hard work of examining my own flaws in therapy instead of just blaming everyone else for what went wrong. Life wasn't perfect or fairy tale happy, but it was genuinely good, and that felt like enough. I finished my beer and went inside to call Caroline and make plans for the weekend. The past didn't control me anymore, and the future looked manageable and even exciting. I'd survived something that almost destroyed me and came out stronger on the other side.